everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today is going to be part 2 of my all the standalone books I read in 2018 before I started my channel essentially. So that's January through about May because I started my channel in June. I will leave a card up in the corner to the first half of this video, and without further ado, let's just dive into the second half. Next up, we have Red Sparrow by Jason Matthews, which I have the movie tie-in cover. I will put it up here, but I actually gave it to my grandma because she wanted to read it, and so she has my copy. My grandma is very much into like mystery spy thrillers. Those are the types of books that she reads, so I was more than happy to give it to her. This recently came out as a movie with Jennifer Lawrence, so if you want to know more about it, you can check out the trailer. I mean, it's basically the same plot as the book, so if you want to know more about the book, you can look at the trailer. I actually haven't seen the movie yet. I just never got around to it. Sometimes that happens, you know? Too busy reading books to watch movies. Anyways, this novel follows Dominique Egorova, who is forced against her will to become a Sparrow, or a sexpionage spy that uses sex basically as a way to spy on high-powered individuals for the Russian government. She is set to operate against CIA operative Nathaniel Nash, who handles the most important mole in the Russian government. But when their paths collide, secret allegiances will be made and broken. I gave this novel 4 out of 5 stars. The thing I most enjoyed about it is that Jason Matthews is a former CIA operative, so everything about it was almost like a educational as well as it was entertaining, because I really feel like I learned a lot about spying, like the way that operatives like handle their sources and the way that the operations work, things like that. It was very detailed in describing the spying aspect of it, and because it came from someone that used to work in the CIA, you know that that's probably relevant information. And it kind of terrified me a little bit about like all this stuff going on with spying, because it was like so like, oh my god. So it's probably the most realistic spy novel that I've ever read, and I just think that the story was really compelling and it was very fun. One thing that made no sense to me like at all is there were recipes at the end of every chapter, and I thought sometimes, you know, when people do like either things at the snippets at the beginning or the end of the chapter, it has some sort of like relevance to the plot, but this was just like every chapter they would be eating a dish and then there was a recipe. So yeah, maybe Jason Matthews just really likes to cook. But yeah, for anyone that's really interested in learning more about espionage and spying in general, I think this was a really cool way to learn a little bit more about it, because it was a fun, fast-paced spy novel, but also educational because he really went in depth with how the operations worked. Next up, I read The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. I've also read The Handmaid's Tale by her and Alias Grace by her, which both have TV series, with Handmaids being on Hulu and Alias Grace being on Netflix. I highly recommend both. I loved both of those books. I thought that they were really compelling reads. Margaret Atwood really does a very good job of weaving a feminist narrative, using different stylistic choices as a tool to get her point across and her themes and stuff across, such as in Alias Grace, she writes like those in the time period would write, so it reads more like a classic because she adopts the style of that. This was definitely a very interesting stylistic novel, but I have to say this, of the 3 books I've read by her, this one was my least favorite. So this novel begins with the suicide of Laura, a young woman, and decades later follows her sister Iris as she recounts her memories of their childhood and the events leading up to Laura's death. However, this is also a novel within a novel, because there's a novel called The Blind Assassin within The Blind Assassin, which is a novel published posthumously by Laura, and it follows 2 lovers as they meet in like dingy hotel rooms and tell this story of these sci-fi, far-out alien lands and things like that, and it's all very like metaphorical things. There's many different strands of story going on here. We have newspaper clippings from the time that kind of relays the events to the readers. Iris, as an old woman, kind of thinking back on the memories of her life, so how things are going as she's an old woman, and then we go into flashbacks that are memories of her growing up. We also have the story within the story, Blind Assassin. So a lot of different things going on, and it can be very confusing. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. The thing that kind of like killed this novel for me is it was so slow moving at some points, and I know that like some novels are supposed to be slow and they're like character driven and stuff, but it was really just like I felt like no character development was happening, no plot was happening. I just was bored. And then because there were so many different narratives going on, I wanted to skip ahead to the exciting ones, which like obviously you can't just like, I mean you can skip chunks of books if you want, but like I'm not gonna do that. So this novel really dragged for me in some points, and it was just like very like, the best way to describe it is like meta, like everything was a metaphor, and there were some really good like shocking twists and turns, and I guess like the ending was pretty good, but like I don't know, just something about it just like fell flat. It was a very complicated structure to the novel, and I felt like it just made the story more complicated than it had to be, just for the sake of having it be this like mystery. It's not really a mystery. Margaret Atwood is a very good writer. I mean, her prose is really good. She thinks of very intriguing and compelling stories, but this one was just not my favorite of hers. So next up, we have not a standalone, but the 2 first novels in a series. I didn't include these in my series wrap-up, 1, because my series wrap-up was already long enough, and 2, because if it wasn't a completed series, I wanted to put it in this video. And it turns out I only read 1 series this year that isn't completed yet, and that is Scythe and Thunderhead by Neil Shusterman. And I got this one signed at BookCon. So it has a signature in it. I didn't actually meet Neil Shusterman myself. My friend that I was there with went up and met him, so she got my book signed for me. Which, if you go to BookCon, try and go with some friends and like spread out amongst the different authors and just bring each other's books, because that's how I got way more books signed than like the 2 signings per day. So Scythe takes place in the near future where humans have defeated death. To control over population, special people called scythes are the only ones with the power to kill. So basically the only way to die in this world is when a scythe comes knocking at your door. So Citra and Rowan are chosen to be the scythe's apprentices, even though it is a fate that neither of them want. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars, and I gave Thunderhead 5 out of 5 stars because they were both so good. I love them. I'm not a giant fan of dystopian novels. This is probably the first dystopian novel that I've thoroughly enjoyed since The Hunger Games. I think it's the book that started the whole YA dystopian novel trends. I honestly usually have such an aversion to dystopians. I don't think I've even really read any other dystopians since The Hunger Games, so these really caught my eye. If you know, I picked these up. I just thought the whole concept of this world was very thought-provoking. The political structure was very compelling because you'd think that scythes are supposed to be compassionate and kind because they are the ones that are controlling the fate of like people that die. Some people take it as like a very doctor type role where you have to comfort someone in their death, but every scythe is allowed to have their own style, and you can see that some of the people within the organization are corrupt and power hungry. So it's just like the political intrigue in both of these novels is one of the most interesting aspects. And I also think for a YA novel, it has a very good discussion of how life could be meaningless if we had infinite time. So I think that even though, you know, it's a YA novel that packs a punch, it has a discussion of some really important moral and like philosophical, that's how you say it, some really interesting moral and philosophical themes. I thought the character development was spot on, top notch. Read these books, man, they're good. So the next novel that I read is actually a nonfiction. So I haven't really read many nonfiction besides like science books. When a couple of friends of mine said that they wanted to read this book together, sort of like a book club thing, I decided, yeah, I'm gonna read it. So I got it from the library, which is why I don't have a physical copy, but go support your local library, kids. And this one is called Masula by John Karakar. I think that's how you say his name. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. But yeah, this novel has many trigger warnings. Trigger warnings for sexual assault, rape, and all that. So if you are triggered by those things, I would say don't even watch my part of the video where I'm discussing this book, because in order to discuss it, you need to talk about those triggers that this book has. So yeah, just skip over it if that's something that you are uncomfortable with. But anyways, this book investigates a series of sexual assaults that took place at the University of Montana, and basically the mishandling of these rape cases by both the local police department and the university. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. For me personally, it was probably one of the hardest books to read that I've ever read in my life. There were some points where I just got so upset and angry reading it, like I had to put it down because I was almost in tears. Definitely not an easy read, but it discusses things that are really important to just like be aware of in today's society, especially as a college age woman. There were some very detailed descriptions of sexual assaults, firsthand accounts of like what the woman said occurred to them, very descriptive. So, and again, it was very hard to read. I mean, it was disturbing. Like, it's not an easy topic to read about at all. So yeah, this was a very emotional book for me to read. And I think that coming from a college campus where there have been similar sexual assault cases coming to light on campus, and sometimes how they're mishandled, seeing the results of, you know, what's going on, but also, you know, sometimes you know of these girls that are going through this. And I think that this book really brought to light how these cases can be so mishandled by the Justice Department and the university. It really gave me a better understanding of why victims sometimes just don't come forward, because it can be re-traumatizing to go through that whole process of reliving your sexual assault over and over again. So yeah, I'm glad that I've read it because I just think it was really important to know about, but it was very, very, very emotional and hard read, and I would not recommend it unless it's something that you really think that you'd be able to handle, because I thought I'd be okay with it and I still got very upset at some points. And you know, it wasn't enough to deter me from reading, but it was definitely a lot, and I read this book very, very slowly, just like maybe a chapter or two a night, because I couldn't stomach it all in one go. It was disturbing and hard to read, but important. The only reason that I gave this 1 star off, so 4 out of 5 instead of 5 out of 5, is that I know in Krakauer's novels, he usually uses the structure of using a particular case about some sort of thing. So like using this case study of University of Montana to talk about sexual assault in college campuses on a wide scale, but I felt that his discussion of sexual assault like on a nationwide level on college campuses, it was just like not that short. Like I thought he should have gone into detail more of like on the national level and the nationwide effect that these kinds of cases have, worldwide effect of how these cases have, and like how things are perceived, you know, how things are working on a higher level. And I thought that kind of analysis was a little bit lacking in this novel. I definitely recommend it if you want to learn more about it, if you can handle it. And the last book that I'm going to talk about today is Sky in the Deep by Adrienne Young. I got this in my first ever Owl Crate box that I got, which, as you can see, because it's got the blue foil instead of the gold, I adored this book. I just thought it was so fun. Elin is a Viking warrior who is freed to the battlefield. Her brother tragically died 5 years ago in a battle with a rival clan. However, Elin's world is changed when she is fighting said rival clan and sees her brother fighting with the enemy on the other side of the battlefield. Faced with her brother's betrayal, she has to survive the winter in enemy territory. However, a bigger threat comes to threaten the way of life for both clans. Overall, I gave this book 4.25 stars out of 5. For whatever reason, I've seen this book Brown on BookTube being referred to as a fantasy, and I just want to say it is not a fantasy, it is a YA historical fiction. Even though, you know, it seems very fantasy-esque, it is historical, because the Vikings were real people that existed. And there's no, like, magic system or anything like that, it's just about Vikings. However, don't let that deter you because it is a really good book. It says breathe fire on the front. I'm all about that. The thing that really stuck with me most about this book is it packed an emotional punch that I was not expecting. I was thinking Vikings, like battles and like cool fight scenes, but Adrienne Young is really good at writing about the emotions that Elin is going through as she, you know, finds out about her brother's betrayal and like different feelings that she feels. I just was taken aback by like how emotional I felt reading this book. She's really shines as a writer reading about the emotions of her character. Also, I've never read a Vikings themed novel before, and I was very into this. I like Vikings. I think they're really cool, really badass. I mean, look at her with that axe. She's gonna go, you know, fight some people on the battlefield. I'm here for it. I like that I got to learn a little bit more about the Viking culture and way of life through this fiction work. I thought that the character development was superb. The kind of emotional arc that these characters go on throughout the novel was just put me in my feels, you know? However, the only complaint that I have about this book is I felt like the main conflict in the end was a little bit rushed. I thought that there could have been more page time devoted to the badass Viking fight scenes, but overall this is a beautifully written book about a brutal, violent people that manages to have complex, multi-dimensional characters and that really pulls at the emotional heartstrings. So yeah, as you can see, as it kind of like progressed throughout the year, how kind of I've been trying and playing around with different genres, and if you see my series wrap up, you'll see that most of those series I read were YA series. I think those are the types of books that I really want to focus on reading in the future, and I just want to stick with, because those are the books where I finish the book and I put it down and I just think about how much I love them, whereas sometimes with these other types of books, they just don't have the same effect on me. I really like big, intricate worlds and series where you really get to spend a lot of time with characters. That being said, I still am open to playing around with different genres. As you can see, I've read a lot of different types of books this year so far. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit more about how my reading year has been going so far. Be sure to check out my series wrap up if you want to know more about all the series that I read in 2018 so far, from the time of January to when I started this BookTube channel in June. And you can check out my June wrap up if you want to know about what I read in June. Alright, so have some fun, read some books, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.